Stay with me, because what one millionaire saw on a rainy Tuesday night would change 2 lives forever. The rain had been falling steadily for almost an hour when Ethan Carter finally left the headquarters of Carter Financial Group. The downtown streets glistened beneath rows of streetlights, reflecting streaks of gold and white across the wet pavement. It was nearly 9 o'clock. Most employees had gone home long ago. Ethan loosened his tie as he stepped into the back seat of his black luxury sedan and prepared to answer another round of emails. Then something outside the window caught his attention. "Stop the car," he said suddenly. The driver glanced at him through the mirror, but obeyed without question. Ethan stared through the rain-covered glass toward a small corner near a bus stop across the street. A young woman stood beneath a faded blue umbrella. In one hand, she held a cardboard box. In the other, she held several candy bars. Every few minutes, she approached passing pedestrians with a polite smile. Most people ignored her. Some shook their heads. Others walked by without even making eye contact. Yet she continued smiling. Ethan frowned. There was something familiar about her. Then he recognized her. Emily Parker, the cleaner from the 12th floor. Every morning she arrived before sunrise. Every evening she disappeared before most executives noticed she was there. Ethan had seen her dozens of times pushing a cleaning cart through empty hallways. She always greeted people politely. She always worked quietly. Yet here she was, standing in the rain selling candy on a street corner. Ethan watched as a businessman brushed past her without slowing down. Emily simply adjusted the box in her hands and offered a candy bar to the next person. Her smile never faded. Another customer stopped. A young mother with 2 children purchased several bars. Emily thanked her warmly. The children smiled back before hurrying away. Something about the interaction felt genuine. There was no self-pity in Emily's expression. No embarrassment. Only determination. Ethan looked toward the brightly lit office tower behind him. His company employed thousands of people. Salaries were competitive. Benefits were generous. Yet one of his own employees was spending rainy nights selling candy on a sidewalk. The contradiction bothered him. "Do you know her?" the driver asked. Ethan nodded slowly. "She works for me." The driver glanced again through the windshield. "Maybe she is raising money for something." Ethan continued watching. 10 minutes passed. Then 20. The rain grew heavier. Emily remained there. Her jacket was damp. Her shoes were soaked. Still she stayed. Finally, she checked her phone and looked inside the nearly empty box. A small smile crossed her face. It looked like relief, like she had reached a goal. She carefully counted the remaining candy bars, closed the box, and began walking toward the bus stop. Ethan's eyes followed her. That was when he noticed something else. As Emily opened her worn shoulder bag, a white envelope briefly slipped into view. Across the front was a hospital logo. Before she tucked it away, Ethan caught sight of a number printed near the bottom. The amount was large enough to make him sit forward in his seat. Suddenly, the candy bars made sense. But the hospital bill created a much bigger question. And what Ethan discovered next would make it impossible to forget Emily Parker ever again. The next morning, Emily Parker arrived at Carter Financial Group at 5:30 sharp, just as she had every weekday for nearly 3 years. The city was still waking up. Streetlights glowed faintly against the pale blue sky, while delivery trucks rolled through nearly empty streets. Inside the 40-story office tower, the marble lobby echoed with the quiet hum of air conditioning and distant elevators. Emily pushed her cleaning cart across the polished floor, greeting the security guard with the same warm smile she always wore. No one looking at her would have guessed she had spent the previous evening standing in the rain selling candy until nearly 10 o'clock. No one would have guessed she returned to a small apartment after midnight, sorted receipts at her kitchen table, and slept barely 4 hours before starting all over again. That was the thing about Emily. She carried her struggles quietly. By 7 o'clock, employees began arriving. Executives hurried through the lobby carrying coffee cups and smartphones. Most never looked twice at the woman wiping fingerprints from glass doors or emptying recycling bins. Emily did not seem to mind. She focused on her work with the same attention she gave everything else. Meanwhile, 20 floors above, Ethan Carter stood beside the floor-to-ceiling windows of his office, staring down at the city below. Normally, his mornings were packed with meetings, investment calls, and strategic reviews. Today, his thoughts kept returning to a cardboard box filled with candy bars and a hospital envelope bearing an amount large enough to concern anyone. He pressed a button on his desk phone. Sandra, can you send me the personnel file for Emily Parker? There was a brief pause. The cleaner from facilities? His assistant asked. Yes. 10 minutes later, the file arrived. Ethan expected very little information. Instead, he found himself reading every page. Emily was 28 years old. She had worked for the company longer than many junior managers. Her performance reviews were consistently excellent. Not a single complaint. Not a single disciplinary issue. She rarely took vacation days. She rarely called in sick. Yet one detail stood out. Her emergency contact listed only one person. Lucas Parker, younger brother. Ethan leaned back in his chair. No spouse. No parents. No other relatives. The file raised more questions than it answered. Around lunchtime, Ethan stepped out of a conference room and crossed paths with Emily near the executive hallway. She was replacing supplies in a break room. For a moment, neither expected to see the other. Good afternoon, Mr. Carter, Emily said politely. Ethan studied her face. She looked tired. Not dramatically tired. The kind of tired someone develops after carrying responsibility for too long. Yet she still smiled. Good afternoon, Emily. She seemed surprised that he knew her name. Most executives did not. Ethan noticed a small notebook partially visible inside her pocket. The cover was worn from use. Several pages were filled with handwritten numbers, budgets, calculations, payment schedules. Emily quickly tucked it away. Have a good day, sir, she said before returning to work. Ethan watched her disappear around the corner. Something about the notebook bothered him almost as much as the hospital bill. Later that evening, after most employees had gone home, Ethan reviewed security footage from the previous month. Not because he distrusted Emily, because he wanted answers. What he discovered surprised him. Every night after finishing her shift, Emily spent nearly 30 minutes in an unused conference room. Alone, sitting beside a whiteboard, studying financial reports left behind after meetings. She copied notes into the same worn notebook. Night after night, week after week. And when Ethan zoomed in on one page she had forgotten to close, he realized something astonishing. The woman cleaning executive offices understood financial models well enough to challenge some of his junior analysts. Suddenly, the hospital bill was no longer the most interesting mystery surrounding Emily Parker. The discovery stayed with Ethan for the rest of the week. Every time he walked past a conference room, every time he reviewed quarterly projections, every time he listened to analysts' present market forecasts, he found himself thinking about Emily Parker sitting alone after hours, studying financial models most people assumed she could never understand. The contradiction refused to leave him alone. On Friday evening, long after the executive floor had emptied, Ethan decided to see it for himself. He remained in his office with the lights dimmed while the city outside slowly transitioned from sunset to darkness. One by one, employees headed home. Elevators grew quieter. The building settled into its nighttime rhythm. At exactly 7:15, Emily pushed her cleaning cart into the executive wing. She worked methodically, just as she always did. Wastebaskets, glass doors, conference tables. Nothing about her behavior suggested she knew she was being observed. Ethan watched discreetly through a partially open office door. Nearly an hour later, Emily finished her final task and wheeled the cart toward a storage room. Then, exactly as the security footage had shown, she walked into an unused conference room carrying her notebook. Ethan remained where he was, curious. Minutes passed. Finally, he crossed the hallway and paused outside the room. Through the glass wall, he could see Emily seated alone at the long conference table. Financial reports were spread in front of her. She copied figures into the notebook before making calculations on an old handheld calculator. Her concentration was remarkable. There was no hesitation, no guessing. She moved through the data with confidence. Ethan quietly stepped inside. Emily looked up immediately, startled. The calculator slipped from her hand and landed softly on the table. For a moment, neither spoke. Then Emily quickly began gathering the papers. "I am sorry, Mr. Carter," she said. "I was just organizing some documents before taking them to recycling." Ethan glanced at the notebook. Those documents were from a strategic investment meeting. Emily froze. The silence lasted several uncomfortable seconds. "Yes, sir." Ethan walked closer. "And those calculations are not recycling." Emily lowered her eyes. Color rose in her cheeks. Ethan expected embarrassment. What he saw instead was disappointment, as if she were angry with herself for being caught. How long have you been studying finance? He asked. Emily hesitated before answering. A long time. Long time is not a number. A faint smile appeared despite her nervousness. Since college. Ethan sat across from her. You studied finance? Emily slowly nodded. Outside the conference room windows, city lights shimmered against the dark skyline. The building felt unusually quiet. I was in my third year, she said softly. Then life changed. Ethan noticed how carefully she chose those words. Life changed. Not failed. Not collapsed. Changed. What happened? Emily looked down at the notebook resting beneath her hands. My parents passed away within 6 months of each other. Ethan said nothing. Lucas was 16 at the time. There was nobody else. Her voice remained calm, but Ethan could hear the weight behind it. Tuition became impossible. Rent became important. Food became important. Hospital visits became important. The last words caught Ethan's attention immediately. Hospital visits. Suddenly, the envelope he had seen near the bus stop returned to his memory. Emily seemed to realize what she had said and stopped speaking. Ethan leaned forward slightly. Is that why you sell candy after work? Emily's expression changed. Surprise. Then resignation. She understood immediately that he had seen her. For several seconds, she stared at the table. Finally, she nodded. Lucas needs treatment. Ethan felt a heaviness settle inside his chest. Is he very sick? Emily swallowed. Her fingers tightened around the notebook. The doctors are trying their best. She offered a small smile, but this one never reached her eyes. Then she opened the notebook to a page Ethan had not seen before. Across the top were dozens of numbers. Medical expenses, treatment costs, future projections. Ethan studied the page carefully. The final total at the bottom made his breath catch, because no amount of candy sales could ever reach that number. For several long seconds, Ethan stared at the total written at the bottom of the notebook page. The figure was larger than he expected, larger than most families could handle without years of preparation. Emily quietly closed the notebook and slipped it back into her bag. She seemed embarrassed that he had seen it, yet there was something else in her expression. Pride. Not the pride of someone pretending everything was fine. The pride of someone who refused to surrender. The conference room remained silent except for the distant hum of air conditioning. Finally, Ethan leaned back in his chair. How long have you been dealing with this? Emily looked toward the dark city skyline outside the glass wall. Almost 3 years. Ethan slowly nodded. 3 years. 3 years of cleaning offices before sunrise. 3 years of selling candy after work. 3 years of carrying responsibilities most people never imagined. Yet she had never complained. She had never asked anyone for special treatment. And Lucas does not know about the candy? Ethan asked. Emily immediately shook her head. No. A small smile appeared on her face. He thinks I work extra shifts. Ethan could not help noticing how protective she sounded. Every difficult decision she made seemed connected to one goal. Keeping her younger brother focused on getting better. Keeping him hopeful. Keeping him from feeling guilty. The realization stayed with Ethan long after their conversation ended. Later that night, as he sat alone inside his penthouse overlooking Charlotte, he found himself thinking less about the hospital bill and more about Emily herself. Most people in difficult circumstances eventually became bitter. Some became angry. Others simply gave up. Emily had done none of those things. She continued working, continued studying, continued moving forward. The next afternoon, Ethan received another surprise. One of his senior financial analysts entered his office carrying quarterly projections that required review before a board meeting. During the discussion, Ethan noticed an unusual error buried inside the forecast model. It was not catastrophic, but it would have created inaccurate expectations for the following quarter. The analyst apologized and promised to correct it. After the meeting ended, Ethan opened a folder containing several pages he had quietly photographed from Emily's notebook the previous evening with her permission. He compared her handwritten calculations to the report his analysts had produced. What he discovered left him speechless. Emily had already identified the same weakness in the model. Weeks earlier, working alone in a conference room after finishing janitorial duties, Ethan stared at the numbers. The woman cleaning executive offices possessed instincts many trained professionals struggled to develop. That evening, he made a decision. The following morning, Emily received a message requesting that she report to the executive floor at 10 o'clock. Her first reaction was concern. Employees were rarely summoned directly to the chief executive officer's office. By 9:55, she stood outside the reception area holding a folder against her chest. Sandra, Ethan's assistant, greeted her warmly. "He is expecting you." Emily nodded nervously and entered. The office felt enormous. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the city. Modern artwork decorated the walls. Everything inside reflected success. Ethan stood beside the windows when she arrived. "Please sit down," he said. Emily carefully took a seat. "Did I do something wrong?" Ethan smiled slightly. "No." She visibly relaxed. Ethan placed a document on the desk between them. "I have a proposal." The word immediately caught her attention. Emily glanced down at the paper. It described a competitive internal leadership development program designed for future executives. Employees selected for the program received advanced training, mentorship, and opportunities to move into management positions. Emily looked back at him in confusion. There must be some mistake. "There is not." Ethan slid the document closer. "I want you to apply." Emily stared at him as though he had spoken another language. Then she laughed softly. Not because she found the idea amusing, because it felt impossible. "Mr. Carter, I clean offices. You also understand financial modeling better than some people who work in finance." Emily's smile disappeared. The room became very quiet. Outside, sunlight reflected across the glass towers of downtown Charlotte. Inside, a completely different future seemed to be opening in front of her. But what Ethan expected to be a life-changing opportunity would receive an answer he never saw coming. Emily looked at the document for several seconds before slowly pushing it back across the desk. Ethan blinked. That was not the reaction he expected. Most employees would have celebrated the opportunity. Some would have accepted immediately. Emily simply shook her head. "I cannot." Ethan frowned. "Cannot or will not." Emily lowered her eyes. "Both." The answer surprised him even more. Sunlight streamed through the office windows, illuminating the proposal resting untouched between them. Ethan leaned forward. "You have the ability. We both know that." Emily offered a polite smile. Ability is not always the problem. Ethan studied her carefully. The confidence she showed while solving financial models had disappeared. In its place stood something heavier. Responsibility. Exhaustion. Fear of risking the little stability she still had. "Help me understand," Ethan said. Emily hesitated before speaking. "The program requires evening training sessions." Ethan nodded. "Yes." "And weekend workshops." "Yes." Emily folded her hands together. "I spend my evenings working." Ethan immediately thought of the candy bars. "You should not have to do that forever." Emily looked toward the city skyline beyond the windows. "Maybe not. But Lucas needs treatment now. Not someday." Her voice remained calm, but every word carried conviction. "The money I earn after work pays for medications, transportation, specialist visits, and things insurance does not cover." Ethan remained silent. Emily continued. "If I enter the program, I lose those hours." She glanced at the proposal one final time. "I cannot gamble with his health." For the first time, Ethan fully understood the position she was trapped in. Most people viewed opportunities as bridges toward a better future. Emily viewed them as risks that could endanger someone she loved. The difference changed everything. Later that afternoon, Ethan found himself unable to focus during a board meeting. Revenue forecasts flashed across presentation screens. Executives discussed acquisitions and market expansion. Yet his thoughts kept returning to a young woman who had just refused the opportunity of a lifetime because she was trying to save her brother. After the meeting ended, Ethan made a decision. Not about Emily's future, about understanding her present. 2 days later, he quietly visited the hospital listed on the envelope he had seen near the bus stop. He did not request private records. He did not ask inappropriate questions. Instead, he spoke with the hospital's charitable services coordinator, a program his company occasionally supported through donations. What he learned troubled him deeply. Families facing long-term medical challenges often accumulated expenses far beyond treatment itself. Transportation, housing adjustments, specialized equipment, follow-up care. The numbers added up quickly. Suddenly, Emily's notebook made perfect sense. Every calculation represented another attempt to keep her brother's future intact. That evening, rain once again fell across Charlotte. Ethan left the office shortly after 7 and found himself driving past the same bus stop where he had first seen Emily selling candy. She was there again, standing beneath the same blue umbrella, smiling at strangers, offering candy bars one at a time. The sight affected him differently now. Before, he had seen a mystery. Now he saw sacrifice. A teenager stopped and purchased 2 candy bars. An elderly man bought one. Most people continued walking. Emily thanked each customer exactly the same way, with genuine gratitude. No frustration. No resentment. Ethan remained inside the car watching from across the street. Then something happened. A sudden gust of wind knocked a stack of candy boxes from a small folding table. Several packages scattered across the wet sidewalk. Without hesitation, nearby pedestrians helped gather them. A delivery driver, a college student, a mother with a stroller. Emily thanked each person warmly. Moments later, everyone continued on their way. Ethan found himself smiling slightly. People responded to kindness. Emily seemed to prove that everywhere she went. As he prepared to leave, he noticed a young boy stepping out of a taxi beside the bus stop. He looked about 16. Thin, pale, wearing a hospital wristband. Emily's entire face lit up the moment she saw him. She hurried over and embraced him carefully. The boy laughed. Even from a distance, Ethan could see the affection between them. Lucas. For the first time, Ethan was not looking at a problem to solve. He was looking at a family worth fighting for. And as he watched Emily help her brother into the shelter of the bus stop, a completely different idea began forming in his mind. The idea refused to leave Ethan's mind. Over the next several days, he found himself paying attention to details he might have overlooked in the past. Every morning, Emily arrived before most employees. Every evening, she left after nearly everyone else. In between, she worked without complaint, treated people with respect, and somehow still found time to study financial concepts that many professionals struggled to master. The more he observed, the more convinced he became that her situation was not a story about charity. It was a story about wasted potential. One evening, after reviewing several internal training reports, Ethan requested access to archived scholarship applications that Carter Financial Group had sponsored over the years. He spent nearly an hour reading through old records. Then he found something unexpected. Emily Parker's name. The application was nearly 6 years old. Ethan opened the file and began reading. His eyes widened almost immediately. Emily had graduated near the top of her class in high school. She had earned academic awards in mathematics, economics, and business analysis. Her professors described her as exceptionally gifted. One recommendation letter called her one of the most promising finance students the university had seen in a decade. Ethan sat back in his chair. The woman cleaning conference rooms had once been on track for a completely different future. The next document explained why everything changed. Withdrawal from university due to family hardship. Emergency guardianship responsibilities. Financial constraints. Ethan closed the file slowly. Outside his office windows, the city lights flickered across the evening skyline. Somewhere below, Emily was probably finishing another shift. Somewhere else, Lucas was likely preparing for another round of treatment. Ethan looked again at the recommendation letter. One sentence stood out. Emily Parker possesses extraordinary leadership potential when given the opportunity to grow. Opportunity. The same word kept returning. Not money. Not rescue. Opportunity. 2 days later, Emily arrived at work carrying a heavier burden than usual. Lucas had received updated test results. The doctors remained hopeful, but additional treatment would be necessary. More appointments. More expenses. More uncertainty. Emily spent the morning cleaning offices while mentally calculating budgets. By lunchtime, she had already adjusted 3 different payment plans in her notebook. That afternoon, she received another message from Ethan's assistant. Please report to the executive conference room at 4 o'clock. Emily stared at the message. Her first instinct was to decline. The previous proposal had already been difficult enough. Still, she went. At precisely 4 o'clock, she entered the conference room. Ethan stood beside a large presentation screen. Several folders rested on the table. Sunlight streamed through the windows, casting long shadows across the polished floor. Thank you for coming, he said. Emily nodded cautiously. What is this about? Ethan gestured toward a chair. Please sit down. She remained standing for a moment before reluctantly taking a seat. Ethan opened one of the folders and slid it across the table. Emily glanced at the contents. Her eyes widened. It contained copies of her old academic achievements, scholarships, awards, university evaluations. Where did you get these? She asked softly. From our archived scholarship records. Emily looked away. Memories she rarely allowed herself to revisit suddenly felt very close. Ethan sat across from her. You were exceptional. Emily gave a small, sad smile. That was a long time ago. Talent does not disappear because life becomes difficult. The room fell silent. Emily stared at the papers. For years she had focused entirely on survival. She had stopped imagining what might have been. Stopped wondering whether another future was possible. Ethan leaned forward slightly. I think you have spent years proving what you can endure. Emily looked up. And now I want to know what you can become. The words settled heavily between them. Emily felt her heartbeat quicken. Not because she believed him completely, because a small part of her wanted to. Then Ethan opened the final folder on the table. Inside was something she never expected to see. A formal invitation to compete for a position that had never before been offered to someone outside the corporate leadership track. Emily stared at the invitation for so long that Ethan began to wonder whether she had even heard him. The conference room remained quiet except for the faint sound of traffic far below the building. Sunlight reflected across the polished table as she carefully lifted the document and read every line. The opportunity was real. A 6-month executive development track. Direct mentorship from senior leadership. Full salary. Flexible. Scheduling. A path into the finance department. Emily slowly lowered the paper. Why are you doing this? She asked. Ethan had expected many questions. Somehow that was not one of them. Because talent should not be ignored. Emily gave a faint smile. There are hundreds of talented people in this company. Yes, Ethan replied. But most of them are already standing near the doors that can open for them. The answer lingered between them. Emily looked back at the invitation. Part of her wanted to believe it. Another part had spent too many years being practical. Hope could be dangerous when responsibilities were involved. I need time, she finally said. Ethan nodded. Take all the time you need. That evening, Emily returned home carrying the folder inside her bag. Her apartment was small but tidy. Family photographs lined one shelf. Medical paperwork occupied another. The scent of soup filled the kitchen. Lucas sat at the table working on homework when she walked through the door. His face brightened immediately. You are late. Emily smiled. Long day. Lucas studied her expression carefully. Something happened. He knew her too well. Emily sat across from him and placed the invitation on the table. Several minutes later, Lucas finished reading. Then he looked up with disbelief written across his face. Emily, this is incredible. She laughed softly. That is one word for it. You have to do it. The certainty in his voice caught her off guard. Emily shook her head. It is not that simple. Why not? She gestured toward the stack of bills resting nearby. Because reality exists. Lucas frowned. Reality has existed for years. That has never stopped you before. Emily looked away. His words landed harder than he intended. Later that night, long after Lucas had gone to bed, Emily sat alone at the kitchen table. The invitation remained open beside her notebook. She compared schedules, calculated costs, estimated lost income from reduced evening work. Every version ended the same way. The numbers did not work. Shortly after midnight, her phone rang. The hospital. Emily answered immediately. As she listened, the color slowly drained from her face. When the call ended, she remained motionless. Additional treatment would need to begin sooner than expected. The doctors remained optimistic, but delays would create complications. More appointments, more expenses, more pressure. The following morning, Emily arrived at work carrying the weight of the conversation. She moved through her tasks as usual, but Ethan noticed the difference immediately. Her smile seemed smaller, her shoulders slightly heavier. Near lunchtime, his assistant informed him that Emily had requested a meeting. Within minutes, she stood inside his office. The invitation folder rested in her hands. Ethan looked up hopefully. You made a decision? Emily nodded. Then she placed the folder on his desk. I cannot accept. The words felt final. Ethan studied her face. Because of Lucas. Emily nodded again. The timing is wrong. Ethan remained silent. He could see how difficult the decision had been. He could also see the disappointment she was trying to hide. Emily. She looked up. What if there was a way to protect your current income while giving you a chance to move forward? Confusion crossed her face. Ethan opened a drawer and removed another document. Unlike the first proposal, this one had never existed before. He had spent most of the previous night creating it. Emily accepted the pages carefully. Her eyes widened as she read the first paragraph, then widened again when she reached the second. By the time she reached the final page, she looked completely speechless. Because what Ethan was offering now was not charity. It was something far more powerful. Emily read the document again, then a third time. Her hands trembled slightly as she turned the final page. The proposal was unlike anything she had imagined. Carter Financial Group would create a customized development position specifically designed around her circumstances. She would spend part of her workday training inside the finance department while maintaining full employment benefits. Additional study hours would take place during paid work time rather than evenings. Most importantly, the company would launch a new employee family assistance initiative that provided access to transportation, grants, treatment support resources, and flexible scheduling for workers facing serious family medical challenges. Emily looked up slowly. You created this? Ethan nodded. Last night. She stared at him in disbelief. Why? Ethan folded his hands. Because I finally realized the problem was never your ability. The problem was that every opportunity required you to sacrifice something you could not afford to lose. The room became quiet. Emily looked back at the proposal. For years, every door had come with a price. More debt, more risk, more uncertainty. This was the first time someone had tried to remove the obstacle instead of simply pointing toward the opportunity. I do not know what to say, she admitted. Ethan smiled slightly. You could start by saying yes. For the first time in weeks, Emily laughed. A real laugh. The sound surprised both of them. Yet even then, uncertainty remained. Hope had disappointed her before. She knew life could change without warning. That lesson had been taught many times. Can I think about it? She asked. Of course. Ethan stood and walked toward the window overlooking the city. But do not think about whether you deserve it. Emily frowned. What do you mean? Ethan turned toward her. You have already earned the opportunity. The only question is whether you are willing to take it. That evening, Emily returned home, carrying both proposals. Lucas was sitting on the couch reading when she arrived. The moment he saw her expression, he knew something important had happened. Nearly an hour later, after reading every page, he sat in stunned silence. Emily. She looked up. This changes everything. Emily glanced toward the kitchen where stacks of bills still occupied one corner of the table. Maybe. Lucas shook his head. Not maybe. This is exactly what Mom and Dad would have wanted. The mention of their parents filled the room with a different kind of silence. Emily looked down. She had spent so many years focusing on responsibility that she rarely allowed herself to think about dreams. Dreams felt dangerous when survival came first. Lucas leaned forward. You always tell me not to quit before the finish line. Emily smiled. Sadly, that sounds like something I would say. Then stop quitting on yourself. His words stayed with her throughout the night. The following morning she arrived at work earlier than usual. The office tower was nearly empty. Sunlight had only begun to touch the tops of the surrounding buildings. Emily stepped into the quiet conference room where she had spent countless evenings studying alone. She looked around slowly. The table, the whiteboard, the chair where she sat after long shifts. Every corner of the room carried memories of exhaustion, determination, and sacrifice. Then she opened her notebook. The same notebook that contained years of calculations, hospital budgets, tuition estimates, treatment projections, plans for surviving another month. Near the back, she found something she had forgotten, an old page written during college. At the top, she had written a simple sentence, Future Chief Financial Officer. Emily stared at the words for a long time. Then she smiled. A few hours later, Ethan was preparing for a leadership meeting when a knock sounded at his office door. Come in, he called. The door opened. Emily stepped inside carrying the proposal folder. Neither spoke immediately. She walked forward and placed the signed documents on his desk. Ethan looked down, then back at her. You are accepting? Emily nodded. Yes. Relief crossed Ethan's face. But before he could respond, Emily added something unexpected. Not because I need saving. Ethan smiled. I know. Emily's eyes shined with quiet confidence. I am accepting because I am finally ready to stop standing outside the door. And for the first time since seeing her on that rainy street corner, Ethan realized the woman in front of him was no longer waiting for an opportunity. She was ready to build a future. 1 year later, the same city looked very different to Emily Parker. The streets were the same. The office tower still rose above downtown Charlotte. The morning traffic still filled the avenues below, yet everything else had changed. Sunlight poured through the windows of a modern conference room on the 32nd floor of Carter Financial Group. Around the tables sat department directors, senior analysts, and executive leadership. Financial reports were organized neatly in front of every attendee. At the head of the table stood Emily, calm, professional, confident. A large presentation screen displayed quarterly performance projections she had personally helped develop. 1 year earlier, she had been cleaning conference rooms before sunrise. Now she was leading meetings inside them. The transformation had not happened overnight. It had been built through long hours of study, mentorship, determination, and the same work ethic that once carried her through difficult nights selling candy beneath a bus stop shelter. Ethan sat near the far end of the table, listening carefully as Emily presented. The room respected her because she had earned that respect. Every recommendation was supported by research. Every forecast reflected preparation. Every decision demonstrated leadership. When the presentation ended, the room erupted into applause. Emily smiled politely and thanked everyone before returning to her seat. Across the table, Ethan simply nodded. The gesture was small, but it carried more meaning than words ever could. Later that afternoon, Emily stepped outside the building and paused beneath the warm autumn sunlight. A familiar voice called her name. She turned and smiled immediately. Lucas was walking toward her. Healthier, stronger. The treatment had worked better than anyone dared hope. He no longer looked like the fragile teenager who once stepped from a taxi wearing a hospital wristband. He looked like a young man preparing for his future. How did the meeting go? He asked. Emily laughed. You already know the answer. Lucas grinned. I wanted to hear you say it. Together they walked toward a nearby park. Fallen leaves drifted through the air while families enjoyed the mild afternoon. For a few minutes neither spoke. Then Lucas glanced at his sister. You know something? Emily looked at him. What? You stopped selling candy exactly 10 months ago. Emily smiled softly. She had not realized he was counting. Lucas continued walking. But that was never the thing I admired most. Emily raised an eyebrow. No. He shook his head. The thing I admired was that you never stopped believing tomorrow could be better than today. The words stayed with her. Later that evening, Carter Financial Group hosted a small gathering celebrating the success of the Employee Family Assistance Initiative Ethan had launched months earlier. Dozens of workers and families had benefited from the program. Medical support resources, flexible scheduling, educational opportunities, practical help delivered with dignity. As conversations filled the room, Ethan stepped onto a small stage to address the crowd. He spoke briefly about opportunity, perseverance, and the importance of recognizing potential wherever it existed. Then he surprised everyone. There is one person here who reminded all of us that talent does not care about job titles, he said. His eyes found Emily in the audience. And that determination often hides in places nobody thinks to look. Applause filled the room. Emily felt her cheeks warm. She never enjoyed attention. Yet she understood what Ethan was really saying. This was never a story about rescue. It was a story about being seen. Hours later, after the event ended, Emily stood alone for a moment near the building entrance. The city lights shimmered against the evening sky. Across the street stood the old bus stop where everything had begun. She remembered the rain, the candy bars, the uncertainty, the exhaustion. Then she remembered something else. The choice to keep going. Ethan stepped outside and joined her. Neither spoke immediately. Finally, he glanced toward the bus stop and smiled. A lot can change in a year. Emily followed his gaze. Yes. The answer came quietly, peacefully. She was no longer standing outside opportunity, hoping someone would notice her.